Session title, The Power of Feedback, being a vocal participant in the process, elevating the voices of the workforce, children, youth, families, and communities.
Welcome back. As a reminder, if you can see us but can't hear us, please turn up your speakers on your computer, and if you need additional assistance, the help desk is available. Welcome to our session today, The Power of Feedback, being a vocal participant in the process, elevating the voices of the workforce, children, youth, families, and communities. Under the right conditions, receiving feedback makes us more effective. Each of us makes an important contribution to our organization's collection and use of data. The workforce, children, youth, families, and communities all have an important role in evaluation and continuous quality improvement in order to build evidence and inform best practices. This includes but goes well beyond being important data sources and stewards. This session will explore ways the workforce, children, youth, families, and communities can be active participants in contributing to building a more effective child welfare system that improves the outcomes of children, youth, and families. My name is Madison Sandoval-Lunn, and I am with the Capacity Building Center for States, and I am the facilitator for today's session. I am joined today by an esteemed team of family, youth, and child welfare leaders across the country, and we'll begin the session by having them introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about their role in today's session. Let's begin by having Sylvia introduce herself.
Thank you, Madison. I'm Sylvia Porto, and I'm currently a consultant. I have over 30 years of experience in the field of social work, with 28 of those being in the field of child welfare. I'm the former director of the City and County of San Francisco's Child Welfare Agency. And prior to that, I was in Riverside County, which is a large Southern California county that's mostly rural. And I was the assistant director there as well. But I actually spent 21 years in Riverside County in child welfare and started as a social worker. I moved to San Francisco as the director because I really wanted to experience an urban environment. Urban environments have so much more resources than large rural areas, and so I really wanted to run an agency that had access to a lot of resources for their clients. I retired last August, and I'm now a consultant, and my focus is on leadership development and coaching and the Indian Child Welfare Act. And I do a lot of training for social workers across the state of California, and I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Dee, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks Madison. My name is Dee Banach, and I am a family consultant with the Capacity Building Center for States. I've been a consultant for over 4 years here, but prior to that I have also been a family consultant with our State Department in Connecticut. So in our child welfare agency for about like 10 years. And I'm also a parent advocate for children who are coming into care. I also help them around the areas of special education. And my experience and expertise really centers around family empowerment and engagement. And so I'm just really, really excited to be a part of this panel of just great subject matter experts, and I'm just looking forward to our discussion today.
Thank you, Dee. Louie?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me here. My name is Louie Gasper. I'm a young adult consultant with the Capacity Building Center for States. I have worked in a variety of different roles in child welfare advocacy with organizations such as the International Foster Care Alliance, the National Foster Youth Institute, Foster Club, and California Youth Connection. And in addition to that, I have also been studying political communication at the Evergreen State College, where I focus a lot of my efforts specifically on looking at statewide and national policies in child welfare. And most importantly, I am currently a youth in extended foster care. So speaking on this means a lot to me, both as a professional, but also talking about the opportunities that we can give to our clients.
Thank you, Louie. And finally, last but not least, Dakota.
Similarly but different than Louie, I am a former foster youth myself, though I'm not in extended foster care anymore because I'm older now, so it's pretty cool. My name is Dakota Roundtree Swain, and I am a young adult consultant with the Capacity Building Center for States. As a former foster youth in Massachusetts, a former supervisor with the local CASA program, and a current PhD student at Brandeis University studying social policy, I think I can bring both a macro and a micro lens. So not only am I excited to talk to you today as a former foster youth and advocate for foster care, but I'm also excited to talk to you as a practitioner and as a researcher. So thank you for having me here today.
Thank you, all of our speakers, for joining us today. We're going to jump right into this session, and we're going to begin with you, Dakota. Youth and families have been an important data source, whether they have been survey participants or focus group participants. What is the role of youth and families in the evaluation and continuous quality improvement process?
It's a really great question. Thanks, Madison. I think it's very vital to have these voices in this sort of engagement with CQI. As an example in my own work around improving outcomes for youth aging out of foster care, I actually, when I was a supervisor at CASA, identified the problem that not all youth were receiving the same services as other youth. And so by identifying the problem and then going and actually describing and analyzing the problem, we developed a handbook to have resources all together from all of the partners that we worked with, including asking youth and families what resources worked best for them. So when we put this together, we had this huge handbook, and we first tested it with the youth that were on my caseload. And what we found is that they actually accessed at least one new service. So it was working. It was really addressing our problem. So originally the handbook was only shared with CASA volunteers, but I advocated for it to be also shared with older youth. And they reported that they felt more empowered and more in control of their situations when they had these resources at their hands. By asking youth and families first how to develop resources and then asking them to make comments and give feedback to improve the resources, we get a better product that's richer and works better for all of the people that we are engaging with. Further, by ensuring that your organizations are engaged in CQI practices, we can make sure that we are creating evidence-based solutions that work.
Thanks, Dakota. As a frontline staff, you could have easily compiled a handbook without families and without youth. Retrospectively, why do you think it was important to you to involve them in that process?
Well, as a former foster youth myself, I think our voices matter. I think that we're not giving a voice to the voiceless. We have voices and we need to elevate those voices. When I was in foster care, looking at the statistics made me feel less alone, but also like I was facing an insurmountable task. The numbers for aged out youth are troubling, as we all know, but I think it helped me grapple with my foster care identity. More broadly, communities need to know the magnitude of foster care, because I'd like to believe, potentially optimistically, that they would step up and be foster parents because we have these placement crises. I don't think that many people know about it, but it's not just about getting the word out there. We need to collect data and disseminate data with foster youth and families, not for them. By engaging former foster youth and families in not just sessions like these, but by helping them develop national and regional surveys for measuring data, we can collect more rich information that is informed on all levels by the people experiencing these systems. Furthermore, by engaging with youth and families qualitatively, we allow for a more rich and varied understanding of the experiences of people experiencing the system.
Thank you, Dakota.
Absolutely, thanks.
I'm going to turn the same question over to Louie. So as a passionate youth advocate for quite some time, what are your thoughts about the role of youth and families in evaluation and CQI?
Well, I think that there are a lot of roles that youth can play in those. And when before I discuss it, I'd like to briefly give some context to a project that I was a part of, as well as youth all over the state of California. So in 2014, the Continuum of Care reform passed as one of the biggest child welfare bills in the state. And this bill was meant to reduce unnecessary group home placements, but also looking at a larger level on how to improve the foster home experience for youth, as well as their specific satisfaction levels. And in this process, the California Department of Social Services was ultimately tasked, once this became a law, into implementing it. And one of the ways that they did so was by trying to reach out to youth who have been in the foster care system through organizations to get their input for how this survey should be developed and what to do. A big part of that was there were members both of the Ombudsman Office and the CDSS, the Department of Social Services, that were alumni of CARE who recognized what the importance could potentially look like. So once the Department of Social Services recognized that they wanted youth voice, they reached out to a few different organizations, including California Youth Connection, which I got to be a part of, to look at ways of, all right, looking at youth satisfaction, knowing that they want to be able to gauge that, but it's such a broad topic, and also it's something where it can't easily be identified. So there are two main ways that the youth voice really brought this into perspective, and this was through their help in both the survey development, but also the building recommendations based off of the data. So through advisory board meetings, having youth at the helm, both co-facilitating, but also being in the brainstorming meetings to be part of the curriculum development alongside the stakeholders, this got to shed light on a lot of emerging themes of why youth may not feel satisfied or successful in their homes. So it wasn't this black and white, are you happy or are you not? But there were all these underlying factors that these youth were able to realize from their own experiences, such as not being able to visit their brothers or sisters while living in a certain home, and that's what caused the placement failure, or experiencing over-medication, and that is the reason, and that was one of the other reasons. So they were able to look at the themes in their own life, but match that with the data. And lastly, youth weren't just involved in developing the questions, and they weren't just involved in the collection, but also the dissemination strategies. A lot of these youth were empowered through the Department of Social Services to use their own knowledge with social media in order to reach a broader spectrum of youth. And I think that that was a key piece, that they were empowered to do that. And also they were given voice as far as, you know, what colors should be implemented that would be youth appealing, and how they should do this. So there, whether it's having youth as copy editors for a particular survey, having them as co-facilitators and really building that comfortability for youth, but also gaining that qualitative data and information in those workshops, or whether it's just participating in a Department of Social Services work group, you know, and getting to hear firsthand what the objectives are. I think that there are a lot of roles that youth can play.
Thanks, Louie. I think you brought up a couple of really great points. Number one, it wasn't just inviting young people to the table to react to something, but they were really involved in the analysis of the survey questions, developing the survey questions, but also interpreting the data and providing recommendations for improvement. What would you say was the outcome of this level of youth engagement?
Well, the outcome was, it was very defined. The fact that youth had participated in the survey created a completely different outcome than potentially what it would have otherwise been released and disseminated. So having this accurate content really helps, and one of the ways that youth were able to bring this is by their own experience, specifically with the Foster Youth Bill of Rights. So when this had came to light and they realized that this was an opportunity to gauge the levels of satisfaction for youth, a lot of these youth also realized that there were policies already put into place, such as the Foster Youth Bill of Rights, that they weren't experiencing. And this is something that, you know, youth in group homes are often mandated, they're mandated to have this paper. So it's something that they see every day. And if not, it's something that you get within while working or while being in foster care. So, and this Bill of Rights has stuff all the way from medical care to respect to living conditions. So a lot of the questions that youth got to form were based off of their knowledge off of that. And that wouldn't have been that wasn't picked up by researchers or people who are working in the development beforehand. So this got to really put in relevant questions regarding the foster care experience. So one of the emerging themes, such as over-medication for anti-psychotropic medications, a lot of the youth expressed that they felt like they were over-medicated, they didn't know what they were taking, and they wanted other youth, they wanted that data to be collected so they could further analyze it. So the youth decided to put a two-part question to see if youth were on medication, and if they were, asking them further if they knew why. And this was really important because this is information that hadn't been collected from the department in the past. And they also got to touch on other questions, such as asking if caregivers help them with their homework and other things that we may take for granted or not necessarily realize as the building blocks of what makes a successful home care. So ultimately, youth, as I said earlier, they got to be involved in the designs, the colors, dissemination strategies, but it's also getting to be a full circle project, because these same youth who started at the table at the Department of Social Services are also going to be ending this project or going into the next step at the table as representatives analyzing the data that they brought back.
Thanks, Louie. Dee, I'm going to turn the question over to you. So in a short period of time, we've heard a lot of different ways youth and families can be engaged. As a respected family advocate and family leader, can you tell us a little bit about what your thoughts around families in their role with evaluation and CQI?
Certainly. I think families should be involved in everything. And in my work, I have seen families really be involved on the front end when it comes to the designing and in the implementation of practices and policies. It's not so much in terms of evaluation and that constant CQI, although we're getting there and we're getting better at it. I actually, several years ago, I piloted a program called the Parent Partners Program in Connecticut. And basically that was designed to help provide peer-to-peer support for families who are currently experiencing the system with alumni who have already successfully gone through the process. It was a way for families to get support, but it was also a way for child welfare agency staff to get support and to get education and to get a better understanding in terms of how they would have a better working relationship with the communities in which they served. Part of that also was in that designing, we also helped to evaluate the program to see if it actually was effective and see if we could actually spread it out throughout the other parts of the state. So we worked together as a team, and I love that the spirit of collaboration between our child welfare agency staff as well as the parent partners, because we looked at, what would constitute effectiveness. And some of the questions that we were looking to ask and answer would be, did cases get closed quicker? Were children reunified earlier? Did the recidivism rate decrease? And then also, how does families feel about the process itself? Were they being educated? Did they feel supported? Were they able to find their voice and feel empowered to be able to come up with some tangible ways in which they could be participants in their own life throughout child welfare? And one of the examples that I like to think about in terms of a success was a young mother who her 3 children rights had already been terminated, and she was on her way to losing the 4th. And what ended up happening is that she partnered with a parent partner, and they began to work together as well as her child welfare worker, and she in that sense became empowered herself. She found her voice. She was able to really speak about things that made sense for her when it came to her case. What was the things that would make her successful, and she actually had that be applied to her own case. And so the success is that she was reunified with her child. That was 8 years ago. She never returned back into the system, and so that is just a little bit of what our parent partner project was able to do. And the data really supported that success, so we were able to expand it throughout the entire agency in Connecticut. And so there are parent partners that are hired as staff, as professionals throughout the agency, in every office in the agency. And so I'm really, really proud about the work that we have been able to do and just broaden the horizons in terms of what youth and families can bring to the table.
Thank you, Dee.
You're welcome.
And Sylvia, we know that you are a child welfare leader as well, and having experience as a director. Can you share another example of where families and/or youth were involved in implementation of a CQI?
Absolutely. Just following up on what Dee's just talked about, and about engaging parent partners in the development of new processes in an agency. Because of continuum of care reform in California, San Francisco had to implement a new child and family teaming process. And we had to do it jointly with our behavioral health partners. And so one of the things that we started out with was an implementation team. And part of our implementation team included the staff who were going to be involved in conducting the child and family teams, the facilitators, the policy staff who could shape policy around how our child and family teams were going to be conducted. And we included our parent partners. So our parent partners were parents who had successfully been through our system, and we felt it was important for them to be a part of this process. So one of the things that our parent partners actually suggested in our implementation team process was for us to build in a 15-minute pre-meet before the child and family team meeting so that the parent partner could prepare the biological parent for the meeting. So they would tell them what was going to happen, what was the purpose of the meeting, what the structure of the meeting would be, what the facilitation would be, and prepare them for that meeting. But they also suggested a post meeting, a 15-minute post meeting, to debrief with the parent so that the parent could talk about how they felt about how that meeting went for them, and to make sure that their voice was heard. And we asked very specific questions, what the parent partners did, about the timing, the length of the meeting, the facilitation of the meeting, was it helpful, but also the process that we had used to establish family goals, was that process helpful for them? And so that information was collected, and every 2 weeks we would have an implementation team meeting. We would bring all the staff and the parent partners together, and we would debrief what happened over those 2 weeks through child and family team meetings. And as we debriefed, we would really learn what worked well, what didn't work at all, and what do we need to change, and let's throw out some ideas. And our parent partners were key to putting forward ideas that we then integrated into our process to test for the next 2 weeks. And so we continued to do that. We tested our child and family team process for a year before we really put it into place. And each time we tested the changes that people were suggesting, and they were staff suggestions, they were parent suggestions. Anybody that had an idea, we would put forward and test it. And so it really made the process of implementing our child and family teams much richer and deeper than I think it would have been if we had just started implementing them.
I think thank you for that. I think there was a common theme in all of these conversations here in just a quick few minutes, which is when families and youth are involved with evaluation and CQI, that the changes are probably going to be more effective, longer lasting, and more sustainable. A great point that I think you brought up on this conversation is that the workforce was also invited to the table and involved in this process for change, which sometimes we don't always see. We see leadership involved in that process. So the stewardship of accurate information is really important. So what do you think is the role of frontline staff in seeking and utilizing feedback in their day-to-day work for professional and program development?
Well, we had an excellent opportunity in San Francisco with the National Child Welfare Workforce Institute. They came into San Francisco, and we partnered with them to do a comprehensive organizational health assessment just for child welfare. And with that came a leadership academy for managers and supervisors. And the organizational health assessment and the 2 leadership academies can be found on the National Child Welfare Workforce Institute website, which is one of the resources that you can have access to if you're interested. It was an opportunity, I think, that we were taking for our staff to really engage them in the change processes that were going on in the agency. As a result of continuum of care reform, we were going through a lot of changes in the organization, and it's hard enough to do change on your own, and especially in child welfare because there's so many. So we really wanted to engage the staff in that process. And we wanted to build an opportunity for managers and supervisors to really be more engaged in the change that was happening within the agency. So we had through the leadership academies, the managers and the supervisors each had to identify a topic of change that they wanted to implement that was within their scope of responsibility and their ability to change, of course. And one example of this kind of work was we had a hotline. We were implementing the signs of safety in our agency, and we had a hotline supervisor who really wanted to incorporate the language from the signs of safety into the hotline screening tool. And her theory of change was that she would get richer information from the caller if she put this into place. And so that's just one example of some of the work that was done. Each project did require the development of a theory of change and a logic model that really delineated the steps that each manager or supervisor had to take to implement this change. And in this process, these projects would be brought by the supervisor or the manager to either a supervisor meeting or a management meeting or the implementation team meeting to get feedback about their theory of change, their logic model, and their implementation process. And people would give them feedback about it, and then they might go change their theory of change, or they might change their implementation process. So that feedback was really fueling that change process. That happened throughout their process, and in addition to the feedback that they got, they had to develop specific measurable goals that they were going to accomplish through this change project, because we wanted them to be able to say, this is my theory of change, this is what I want to change, and I would need to be able to measure it to see if it's happening. And if it's not happening, how do I go back and correct the piece that is not leading to that outcome I want? So that's what we were trying to achieve. One of the most significant projects we did in San Francisco was done by a supervisor who really wanted to determine if our data collection for Native American families in San Francisco child welfare was accurate, and were we reporting that data accurately. And she also wanted to know whether we were practicing inquiry and notice and active efforts, and were we referring families to appropriately culturally relevant services. So the first thing that she realized was that we needed to clean up our data, that our data on Native American families in our child welfare system was horrible. And so she used Safe Measures, which is a tool that attaches to our structured decision-making process, to extrapolate the data and to develop some reports for monitoring the data. What was important for her was to really balance for staff the compliance issue and accountability of having data reports to look at and to look at and use to clean up your data, but also with trying to understand why we were doing this, because it was better for children and families, right? So one of the other things we had to do after she got the data that we could manage monthly in reports was we had to provide training to our staff. Our staff really didn't understand the history of Native Americans in the Bay Area and the historical context around some of the issues for Native American people in the Bay Area. So we needed to provide them with that training, something that would get to their hearts, to get them to understand why it was important. And then we provided the training around how to do appropriate inquiry, notice, active efforts, and referrals to community resources. So that was really an important process of what we did.
Thank you, Sylvia. You provided two really great examples of the frontline staff spearheading a lot of these opportunities and changes. What kind of impact did it have on the workforce, having that type of ownership over the changes that they believed needed to happen to improve services to children, families, and youth?
Well, it was really empowering for the staff. It really created ownership of the change in the organization because they were able to decide on the change efforts themselves. They decided, what do I want to improve? What do I want to change? What isn't working in my unit or in my scope of responsibility that I can change? So it built a lot of ownership. The goal was really to distribute leadership across the organization. We really wanted to send the message that leadership is not in a position or in a title. Leadership happens at all levels of an organization, and that everybody should have a voice in saying what should happen in an organization. So we really wanted to spread that message, and it really created that ownership for the staff. The supervisors went through the Leadership Academy in cohorts, and as they developed their projects and implemented their projects and completed their training, they became coaches for the next cohort of supervisors. And each cohort of supervisor would become the coaches for the next cohort. So we were developing their leadership skills as we went through all of the supervisors. Our managers were also coaches for the first group of supervisors, but for any group. And they actually received for their own projects coaching from the National Child Welfare Workforce Institute. So that was really a valuable tool for us as well. One additional wonderful component of this effort was that we had this great collaboration that was created between the University of California at Berkeley and the agency, where we were given access to a graduate student who would help the supervisors and the managers develop their theories of change and their logic models and their specific measurable goals. Because when you're a social worker, you don't learn how to develop theories of change and logic models and measurable goals. You just don't do that. And so it was really a new skill that they needed to develop. And so the graduate student really helped them kind of go through that process and develop those aspects of their change initiative. And then what made it great, I think, for them was that once they had that help, they knew that they had a project that they could really do that was really achievable. And so it was really wonderful.
Thank you, Sylvia. I think you highlighted a number of great points. Number one, the importance of private-public partnership, especially when you want to spearhead some sustainable change. And the other part of it is that change always happens within child welfare. And for the workforce, there's a difference between change happening to you versus change that you're involved or happening with you. And it affects the buy-in that the workforce might have in, as they're the ones providing the services and the families are the recipients of these services. I'm going to turn it over to Louie. Louie, as a youth advocate, I'm sure you have some thoughts around the role of the workforce in obtaining feedbacks from youth and families to improve their personal or professional development. What are some of your thoughts about this particular question?
Well, yeah, I think that I have a lot of thoughts on it. To preface and to expound a little bit more on Sylvia's point and mine, we're talking about our experiences that we've had, working in the child welfare system in California. And you might be hearing all of this and thinking, well, I don't have state policies that support a lot of these ways to get feedback or involve, youth or families in evaluations or really do this. And based off of my experience having other peers who are in the child welfare system, being able to see other agencies, it's not that these social workers, caseworkers are from California and that's why they're the best, not at all. It's because they are the most effective ones because they look at the youth as a client versus looking at them as a caseload, and that impact is ultimately felt. They also broke the stagnant culture to often adopt case plans, to adapt themselves with the youth's case plans. And I have a couple examples of this. So I am currently 20 years old, as you know, Madison, and I am currently aging out of extended foster care. It's a really scary process, and there are a lot of things that I need to do and not a lot of time to do them. And one of the things that we all experience in the system is the monthly meetings that we have with our social workers, which are supposed to, help us in order to reach our goals for our case plan. So these past few months, as I've been getting ready for this transition, I've been having these meetings with my social worker, but as I've been becoming increasingly more independent, it seems almost monotonous in a sense that I would have all these meetings, but there's no even outcome or improvement that's being supplied from them. So I basically called my social worker one day, kind of like a snarky tone too, like, oh, like if instead of spending all this time trying to like fly over 6 hours, 8 hours to meet me, like, why don't you help me do the things on my list? But she took that back, and even though it was like a little bit of just me being angry at the time, she was able to retain that as feedback for herself and her practices. One of the specific things that I told her is that I wanted to see an orthodontist and get a quote to see if I could get reimbursed for braces. And basically, when I gave her the advice to not, to spend the time that she was spending flying over 6 hours, 8 hours to meet me from another state, to focus it to myself, she realized that the laws still meant that I needed to meet with some sort of social worker once a month, but hooked me up with another social worker that was near a nearby state. So now all the time that she was spending to do that and to reach out to see me, she could spend that time looking at my case plan, seeing how to do it. And she actually just called me yesterday to let me know that there was an organization that offers grants for foster youth to be able to give them free braces. And now she is even going a step further to inform other youth on her case plan of how they can apply for these programs even earlier to be able to have this. So she really shifted her competencies and also her knowledge to meet my needs. And I feel like that's a really important thing for anyone in the workforce. Also, speaking to experience that I had with the Department of Social Services, working as one of the youth, initially when they decided that they wanted youth in the evaluations, there was going to be 2 youth on a rotating basis that would go to the Department of CDSS in order to represent these meetings. And we were both from the same exact county, had a lot of the same experiences, and we realized that our experiences weren't the same as all the experiences for different youth in different counties. For example, we were having conversations to see that youth in a lot of rural counties felt like they were more over-medicated because they were isolated to their communities. And because of this, we sat down and had a conversation with the agency and told them, okay, look, we know that you want to involve youth voice at the table, but in order to do that, you need to have a variety of youth voices from a variety of places and not just one. So it's important to get the full youth voice and also make sure that you're assessing what you can bring to the table and what an individual youth needs.
Your feedback to your caseworker seemed to have a profound effect, right? Number one, she's improving the quality of services she's providing to you to meet your needs that you have right then and in that moment, but then also made her maybe think about like leveraging her resources. Instead of flying 6 hours, now she can tap into a local resource. And then finally, her impact with her other young people is exponential now. Now she has another resource to meet this maybe underserved need within that community where she's located. So thank you for sharing that very personal story, and I think a lot of folks will take away a lot from that. So let's go to our final question, and our final question is, how can the child welfare system create opportunities for children, youth, families, communities, and frontline staff to inform evaluation and contribute to transformative change? Let's begin with Dakota.
So as I mentioned before, I'm a PhD student and researcher in social policy, and I specifically focus on youth and families in the foster care system. First and foremost, I am a qualitative researcher. I love that I'm a qualitative researcher because I don't believe it's our jobs to just parrot the voices of the people that we're representing, but actually to engage them on all levels of research. I am gifted with the common lived experience of the many of the youth and families that I interview for my research, and I will tell you that there is this intermingling of souls that happens in these meetings with people who have common lived experience, and I promise you, you won't get that without it. So that really means we need to empower youth and families to conduct this research. You really just have to be they have to be the guiding force behind designing, researching, and implementing policies and processes. Because if they're not, then we're just shouting into the echo chamber of the academy, leadership, the regional office, and we're not speaking to the individuals actually being affected. It is not okay to just hear from us once a year. You need to hear from us all of the time. Thank you.
You put the continuous quality improvement with that last statement. Can you talk a little bit more about a model or a framework in maybe empowering young people or even families to be researchers or co-evaluators with professionals?
Absolutely. So I am kind of a research wonk. So I've done a lot of research on figuring out what is going to work best with families in foster care. And what I found is participant action research is really great. It's also referred to as PAR. And in my published work, I actually didn't use a PAR framework, but it could have been bettered in a couple different ways by using it. So I first gathered a bunch of former foster youth and interviewed them, and that was really the end of the process. I informed them later about what happened with the paper and that stuff, but in a PAR framework, I would have not just interviewed them and stopped there. I would have trained them how to interview other youth, how to transcribe and understand coding and understand how to get information from qualitative interviews. And then I would have set them out in the world, and they would have interviewed other foster youth, come back, coded that research, and then we code together, collaboratively work, and figure out what's really happening. And that is just the best way to do it, I think. And it doesn't have to just be in research. We can use these techniques with writing policies, creating surveys, and conducting national impact studies. And that's just a few of the ways that we can use this. If you're very interested in this, there is a resource for you guys. It's called The Voices of Youth in Foster Care, a Participant Action Research Study. So please check it out if you're interested or a policy wonk like me.
Thanks, Dakota. Louie?
Yeah, I think Dakota really hit the nail on the head. That youth voice and client voice in particular is so important to informing data and evaluations. One of the ways that I got to speak on earlier is the fact that the youth were involved in youth-centered workshops, and this allowed them to be able to share their information and their experiences in a way that was ultimately transcribed into being qualitative data taken back by the agencies. Also having the role as facilitators and curriculum developers and giving that to youth, but also giving them the space in order to become co-creators in that process is another thing that's so vital in order to do that. In my opinion, based on my experiences, youth editors are the future of child welfare. They can fill a gap, especially when it comes to question relatability and a lot of the data relatability coming back. And if they're involved in this end, it can often be a low pressure way to be able to engage them before dissemination or before reaching out. Also, furthermore, with CYC and CDSS, the agency and then the youth organization, the youth really feared that their voices wouldn't be fully implemented. They feared that this would be a process like a lot of other ones where they go to the meeting, everything happens, it seems fine, and they're not fully informed, and ultimately there isn't a change that came out of it. So the Ombudsman Office and the department made it a key in order to not change or edit any of the questions that came up from youth. And because of this, youth felt more validated in their participation and also gave more honest and authentic answers and engagement as far as what questions should be asked for school, school of origin, and as far as over-medication, and as far as the nutritional value that each of these youth are getting in their foster homes. And they were really able to break it down once they knew that their experiences mattered. Also, having them involved beyond the questions in the design, the dissemination level, getting to decide if it's anonymous or confidential based off of what they felt was best. And I feel like it's so important to make a point that there's no glass ceiling as far as how much youth and families can be involved. But I think more than anything, it's important to look at the agencies and the workforce's job to assess their capacities of what they have and the projects that they're working on, and give youth and families the space, but also balanced support based off of accurately gauging what that could be. And really just to hit Dakota's points, an informed process for improvement can't be done just being about youth and about families. It has to be done with them.
Thank you, Louie. And I think you hit on a really important part. You hit on many important parts, but one that really struck me was really closing that feedback loop, right? Like not just engaging them and asking them, what do you think about this? But doing something about it and then coming back to them and letting them know, like, this is what we did with that information, and really building that relationship with the youth and family partners or even the workforce in all of the examples that Sylvia presented. Dee, would you share some of your thoughts on opportunities?
Absolutely. I just want to piggyback off of what everyone said on the panel. I see like one of the main through lines in this discussion really was about seeing the value and the opportunities of everyone involved, not just the youth and the families, but also the agency staff. And in my work, nothing that I have done has not been a part of some type of collaboration with agency staff, with youth, with community stakeholders. Even in the work that I did on the pilot, we really worked as a team, and we wanted to make sure that not only did families feel satisfied, and so we worked on a satisfaction survey, but we also did a satisfaction survey for staff, because it means something for us to be able to work with staff, but it also should mean something for them to work with us. And that's really, really important, is making sure that everybody has a voice at the table. And I really like what you said, Sylvia, in terms of how you all really had that buy-in from your agency staff, because that's really, really critically important in the work that we do. Even here at the center, everything that I do is really, as a family consultant, really is about a partnership, and it's about building relationships. We here at the center, family consultants, as well as center staff, has helped design what we call a Family Empowerment Leadership Academy, which we affectionately call it the FELA, and it really is about helping jurisdictions build an infrastructure to support families as leaders in a professional capacity. We also have the Parent Partner Program Navigator, which is another labor of love from family consultants as well as center staff, and it is also designed to work to build parent partner programs throughout the country in child welfare, similar to the one that I did in Connecticut. So all of this is about collaboration and meaningful partnership and authentic engagement. And once we do that really, really well, I think we're on our way to transforming the system that we all will be proud of.
Thank you, Dee. The work that we're talking about is not very easy, and I'm glad that you cited some resources that are available to our audience that they may utilize, and to recognize that it is a process, and it's about a culture change. It's about a change of recognizing that we all have an ownership and responsibility and ability to foster these changes within the system. Last but not least, Sylvia, final thoughts?
Well, I really think Dakota and Louie have really raised the bar for what the expectation is around youth and family engagement. And I think one of the things that I know is really valuable to child welfare agencies and a requirement is the federal case review process, right? It requires us to conduct interviews of folks who are involved with the child welfare system on cases, to go through and interview youth and parents and service providers, the court, and what was their personal experience with the child welfare system on that particular case. And they collect this information, and then they're supposed to analyze it and take a look at, so what's working well in this agency? What's really going well, and can we replicate that across workers, across agencies, across the state, or what's not working well, and how do we go about correcting that? And I think internally right now, agencies that are doing case review processes are doing a lot of internal work where they're working with their staff and going back and getting the feedback, giving the feedback to their staff and getting their input about how can we make changes to really correct this area where we're not doing so well in. To do what Louie and Dakota are saying is really to take it one step farther, and I guess that would be my challenge to child welfare agencies out there. If I was still there, I would be challenging myself to really start taking it past that, you know, engage parent partners, engage youth, engage our service providers and our community stakeholders in those case review processes, and not so much in the review, but taking that data and then what are we going to do to improve, and how do we, that to me that's like the collective collaboration that Dee was talking about, is how do we as a system improve our system with the voices of everybody that's either a part of it or sharing with it, voices that are both personal and professional within and with the child welfare system, right? So our change improvement project in San Francisco was really internally. I think that if we were to really make a difference in the work that we're doing, we'd do what you two are talking about and really take it to the next level.
Thank you, Sylvia. So we are about to wrap up our session, so I want to give the opportunity to the speakers to provide some final thoughts and some final takeaways. I know one of the important takeaways I've had from this conversation is that not only is there a need to have many seats at the table, but a process to support and engage all folks, and not just a select few individuals in this process, and that includes the workforce, families, youth, and as well as our communities, and that includes universities and private partnerships as well. So with that being said, I'm going to ask, we're in order, Louie, Dee, Dakota, and Sylvia to share their final thoughts.
Well, thank you, and thank you everyone for sharing such thoughtful answers. I think that the culmination of all of our voices being able to talk about our experiences, but also how the child welfare system can improve, really came together even better than I could have imagined. The one takeaway and hope that I would hope that people gain from what I've said is that engaging youth and families and clients in child welfare research and evaluations, it may seem idealistic, it's very much an investment, but it's one well worth taking. In the fact of the Youth Satisfaction Survey, a plethora of questions were developed around the Foster Youth Bill of Rights that would have never been made, never been disseminated out to youth if they hadn't played that role. As far as the Youth Research Academy with the McCreary Center Society, these youth got to participate in research and present their findings to 44 statutory and non-statutory agencies, which then implemented educational policies based off of it. So it may seem idealistic, or it may seem like it's hard to do, and there are extra steps you might need to take, such as making a longer process or drawing feedback out from a youth if you're a caseworker, but it's an investment well worth taking.
Thank you, Louie. Dee?
Yeah. Thanks for having me part of this great panel. I think we all share in the enthusiasm of where the direction of child welfare is going, and we just want to be able to be intentional about how we work with families and with youth. It's something that we have to think about every single day. We have to think about how we work with them differently and be more creative about it. We have to be intentional until it becomes habitual in our work. The process is just as important as any outcome. So how we work with one another, how we see one another, how we see our skills, our unique skills and areas of expertise really is going to draw that out for us in order to see some of the changes that we want to make. And the partnership can only be better as we bring more people in. Like you were saying, Madison, it's just not a few of us. All of us have a contribution to the work. And so it's all up to us to really capitalize off of those strengths and really, look at the data and not only just have families and youth be a part of designing and implementing, but also how do they come up with, survey questions, and how do they evaluate for effectiveness, and how do they also become, researchers and also reassess the data. It just has to be a continuous basis for us to provide those spaces for families and youth their voices to be heard.
Thank you, Dee. Dakota?
So I completely agree with everything that's been said so far, and I am also just so overwhelmed and honored to be here with all of you today. You guys do have a tough job, and we're just trying to make it a little easier, hopefully. If you were to take away one thing from this today, which I really hope you take away more than one thing, but if you don't, just remember that as practitioners, we don't always know better or know more than our clients. We need to work collaboratively with them because the whole goal is to help families and youth. And it's not okay to just talk to a few youth who we find as all-stars like Louie and I here, but every youth here that you work with, you should be talking with. Every family that you work with, you should be talking with and asking them what can make things better, because we have tough jobs, we have very difficult jobs, and wouldn't it be a little bit easier if we were walking hand in hand with our clients instead of in an antagonistic relationship with them? Not saying it's going to be easy, and some may say it's idealistic, but I think that they just haven't had the vision yet. So thank you so much, and I hope you have a lovely rest of the expo.
Thank you. And then Sylvia.
I think as a child welfare professional for over 28 years, I've seen the field really evolve, and it really evolved from one in which the social worker made all the decisions on a case without a lot of input, to one in which agencies are beginning to understand that they need to engage their stakeholders, their partners, the community, parents, youth. They need their voice at the table in order to really implement the changes that we need to put in place. And I think an understanding is just simply not enough. I think agencies must do better. Child welfare agencies must step up to the plate and really take an opportunity to reach out to those less than traditional voices, bring people to the table, and really have them, our youth and our parents and our community providers and our court personnel, all of the folks that really shape this work, be at the table and really be a part of the implementation, the design, exactly as Dee said it, the design, the implementation, the feedback, the testing of whatever change happens in child welfare. We know that child welfare will continue to change. That's a given. So let's do it the best way that we can. And that's my challenge to agencies, is to engage everybody in that process.
Thank you, Sylvia. And I'd like to just say thank you, all of you, for spending time with us today and sharing all of your expertise, knowledge, insights, and even giving me some information that I can take away as well. Please note that the handouts for today's sessions, as well as the resources mentioned, are available to download in the handouts window. Thank you for participating in this session.
Logo for the Child Welfare Virtual Expo. Child Welfare Virtual Expo. This video was developed for the Child Welfare Virtual Expo by the Capacity Building Center for States and is sponsored by the Children's Bureau. Its content does not necessarily reflect the views and policies of the Children's Bureau.